Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed and ahead of the curve. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Today I've got Derek Cottrill in Northwest Missouri and Rodney over in Illinois. How are you guys doing?
Great. Staying cool.
Good. Morning, Nick.
Yeah, it's an important thing to do right now, isn't it, Rodney?
Yeah. After Monday, this feels like a spa day.
Well, guys, I thought, we kind of go through a quick update from the geography, and then we get into some of maybe the more hot topic, pressing topics, I guess you might say, of today. So I don't know, Derek, if you want to maybe start us out with where you're at, rough update, where your things are sitting in your geography.
Sure. Well, I guess over the last couple of weeks since our last podcast, the big topic has been fungicide passes and corn and now soybean both. I'd say for the most part, we're on that back end of what I would consider the key fungicide timing in corn type thing, where I'd put most corn in that. We got some maybe still shedding some pollen, but most now is getting into that R1 to R3, and there's probably even some R4 corn out there with some of the early late March planting dates that we had. Fortunately, disease continues to be, relatively speaking, pretty slim out there as far as what we're seeing in terms of the disease. I think a lot of that has to do with what you and Rodney were just talking about there with the extreme heat type thing. But corn is still in sensitive stages where it's trying to fill grain and put on test weight and could be sensitive to certain stressors. And on the bean side of things, I'd say the majority of soybeans in my area are falling into that R2 to R3 time frame, but I've been in a few that we are getting into that R4 type stage, which right before we get into grain fill in those in soybeans as well. And similar to corn stressors right now, we haven't seen a whole lot in terms of, say, disease. I'd say jack beetles have been around in certain areas, but probably not as significant, in my opinion, as in the past. But, any form of stress type deal is going to still impact soybeans, or at least have the potential to significantly impact soybeans at this point. And so while we might be on the later half of our management programs, we still got time to manipulate that crop where it makes sense a little bit.
Appreciate that, Derek. What about you, Rodney?
Yeah, real similar to what Derek just said, but corn is, our corn was planted in a pretty even window, so fungicide has pretty much been on the first pass. If guys are in a 2-pass program, corn is in that R1 to R3 stage, as Derek said. Looking healthy, but the heat has sure moved the crop along quicker than I like, and it is showing some stress. I hope we get some rain here on Friday, like they're forecasting it. I can't believe I'm saying that after I couldn't shut it off earlier, and now I'm wishing I had some. Soybean crop is moving along nicely. They finally started growing about 3 weeks ago. They're entering that, like Derek said, that R2 to R3, 4 stage. If we get a rain, they'll put another note on, so we'll kind of hold there. Disease it's been so stinking hot that we've got a lot of bacterial type stuff, not a lot of fungal stuff. But we know it's coming. If it cools off, the tar spots, the southern rust that we'll talk about or later here in the conversation. But as a whole, the crop looks good, looks decent. But the heat is sure showing the tail of what it'll do to a crop when it stays extended like we've had.
Yeah, appreciate that, Rodney. For me, it's kind of the same as it's been all season. We're all over the board with the as early and as late as we planted, with the tails being so far out. So we've got some of that really late planted corn that's maybe just starting to tassel, or maybe not even quite tasseling yet, to corn. Some of the earliest along is got kernels denting on it. So we're almost approaching R5 on that. You probably can find some in the bottom planted early that is really at R5. Most of that April corn is kind of in that dough stage with some kernels starting to dent. That May is milk to dough stage, with the June further behind. So to your guys' point, the heat is pushing it right along. And then on the soybean front, still a fair amount of those May planted beans that are getting fungicide, insecticide right now. Um, some early ones, I was just telling you guys earlier, but some earlier ones that in some geographies where we've been drier, that are deep into R4 and maybe even approaching R5. So that heat and the drier weather here lately has really kind of shoved things along. And then, yeah, from disease standpoint in corn, southern rust is the hot topic, which we're going to get into, and still seeing a fair amount of gray leaf spot just from all the humidity that we've had. But yeah, a lot of things still happening. We'll kind of get into that discussion a little bit on the corn. What this heat's doing to it. With that said, guys, I guess I did want to start out a little bit on the southern rust front in corn. And I'll just say I have to eat a little bit of crow here, because we've been talking about how slow its movement's been in the US all summer long. And then, boom, just there a couple weeks ago, it shows up in Southwest Missouri. And then now, I mean, if you look at the map, it's pretty much all over Missouri. And we can start to see some fields where you can find it on the lower leaves, starting to make its way up. So it's already pushed all the way north in the US to Wisconsin. So it's pretty much all over now. It is a disease that likes warm temperatures and high humidity. So honestly, what we've been having here in Missouri has been ideal for it. Um, it's going to move really quickly. One thing about southern rust is just it can produce new spores like every 7 days, so it moves very, very aggressively. And yeah, I'll let you guys add in there. But the one thing I'll just caveat is, I know there's a lot of people on some of this later planted corn that maybe with the dry weather want to just give up and let it go and not worry about spraying it. And, if it doesn't rain again, maybe that's the right decision. But I'll just say that in southern rust can be really aggressive on that late planted corn. And maybe the yield potential is not as high, but there's a lot more potential to be lost to southern rust on late planted corn than early planted corn. But I'd just be curious your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess my recommendations there, and I kind of mentioned this with my update on, I know we're getting into some of those mid to later R stages of some of the corn, um, and pollination's done with a lot of them, but I do think disease is blowing up right now, and even over the next week, whether it be southern rust or even tar spot, if we would happen to cool off a little bit, I think it can still have impacts because, heavy moisture was a big deal earlier this year, and so our leachable nutrients like sulfur and nitrogen, boron, things like that. There's certainly some crop out there that's going under through nutrient stress and under the stress of the heat. And I think we got to remember that these pathogens we're talking about, whether it be southern rust or tar spot, are pretty opportunistic. Meaning, if the crop's already going through some sort of stress, that's going to be the acre that it takes over in. And last year, uh, one of the big themes during harvest and what I got a lot of calls about was corn wanting to fall over and things like that. Well, southern rust had moved in, the crop was going under stress, and so then what set in? Your stalk rots and stalk diseases and things like that. And so, I guess those certain fields where you've invested so much in that crop right now, my recommendation has just been to continue to monitor those, because we are still at a point where southern rust just now moving in. Even though this time last year, if you were to walk through any cornfield in my territory, you'd come out looking orange. It was that bad. But even if it sets in here over the next week, it could still have significant impacts. And I think we've invested so much in that crop right now. It's worth, at least certain priority fields, it's worth, considering, do I need to continue to manage this or not?
Yeah, and I think up here in Illinois, it's here, but not to the degree you guys are talking about. Um, and we're fortunate. We've got that first pass of fungicide on most of the corn, and so we're helping it through the stressors. We're also getting a lot of good mineralization going on because of the heat pattern. If there's a positive to this heat, it's the mineralization. So we're helping through some of the stress that Derek was talking about. We just need to be cognizant. Like Derek said, a year ago, we would have been looking like a golden boy when we walked out of the field because of the rust. We're not anywhere as close to that this year, but we need to be vigilant and just keep our eye on it. Um, uh, it'll cut. Now we're getting southerly winds, and the hurricane season's really starting to crank up. So we're getting southerly winds to keep blowing this stuff up here. Um, I'm backtracking. We're not to the degree you guys are in Missouri yet, but it's here. I can find it, not to the extent of a year ago. But so up here, we just need to be vigilant and watch it. And we still have time in the maturity of this corn crop. If we need to put another application on, it'll benefit us.
Yeah, good points, guys. And I'll just say too, just add that I've not really seen much of it yet at all and stuff that's been treated with fungicide already. But yeah, starting to show up in the untreated. With on the same topic with Southern Rust, just jumping onto the disease train there with tar spot. Derek alluded to it, but it's also pretty much all over Missouri. It's just not at a high level in at least in the dryland fields. So it's really just waiting on ideal conditions to proliferate again. It's going to like cooler temperatures than what we're having right now, more in the 70s, that high humidity, that prolonged leaf wetness. So we've kind of lacked the ideal temperatures so far to really see it. But when they return, that thing can really take off quickly. And there's been in our geography on some of this irrigated corn on some susceptible varieties. We've been seeing some of it there, but just not on those dry land acres. And so, yeah, just keep in mind that that threat's lurking, especially for this later planted corn. Some of the earlier stuff is starting to really push along, especially the stuff that's been treated. But yeah, just something to keep your eye out and remember. Yeah, you could get a double whammy with the southern rust and the tar spot potentially on some of this late planted corn, which kind of.
Well,
Oh, go ahead,
also,
Rodney.
Nick, I'll say gray leaf spot is prevalent because it loves this heat and humidity, and so tar spot loves misery loves company, and so I've noticed anytime we've got pretty good gray leaf spot, that's usually where tar spot's first. So I've been telling my guy just make sure we watch this. We're in the same boat you are. I can find it not prevalent because it doesn't like this extreme heat, but we're keeping things moist and wet. So when she does cool off and our nights get cooler, it'll rear its head. But I'm hoping that we're going to get late enough in the season that it'll come in late. It'll probably be cosmetic more than yield robbing.
Yeah, good points, Rodney. And the gray leaf spot for us is something that is pretty prevalent right now, for sure. But the disease conversation there to me kind of leads into another question, and one that I've gotten a little bit the last couple weeks is you just how late is too late to apply a fungicide in corn and soybeans? Maybe where we've drug our feet a little bit, couldn't decide whether or not what we wanted to do. Maybe now on this corn with the threat of southern rust, are starting to see it. Should I put it on or should I not? Soybeans a little bit the same way. I know we were just talking earlier, and you guys have been making a comment that your beans are further behind a little bit. For me, in some of these dry areas, they've been pushing along pretty quickly the last couple of weeks. So probably more of a conversation for me on the beans. But I guess to me, when I start thinking about southern rust and the threat that's there, when I'm thinking about corn, how late is too late? You guys can chime in here, but to me, you get to R4, you get to dough stage, you got pretty severe pressure from southern rust or tar spot. There's potential there for it to still pay out, but I think obviously, once you get to dent stage, it becomes a total experiment at that point. And most of the university data that you look at on southern rust is going to say the same thing that R4 is probably about the last trigger you got. you get to dense stage, it's probably over with at that point from a consistent ROI. I've had people do that and claim they still got some payout on it, but it's kind of a hope and a prayer at that point. Soybeans to me, I think you can still get a return as far out as R5. And that's just some of my own data looking at the insecticide application at R5. Just stink bug populations blowing up and still pretty high that late in the season, and being able to blow those back and push those populations back, I think still potentially pays for that application. I won't get into an argument on the fungicide piece. I guess it's just depend on how much disease pressure we have there. But I think the insecticide still carries the heavy load, even if we get all the way to R5. Now it is getting pretty late. Not advocating that as a normal application, but I think there's still some benefit. But I'll let you guys. You got more experience on the fungicide piece than me. I'll let you all jump in.
Yeah,
Yes.
on the corn side of things, my biggest concern is know your hybrids and know your standability. So when we get into this late southern rust, late tar spot, and Nick's spot on the timing. I've seen it pay just early dent. But I'm more worried about standability and harvestability, and especially if you've got acres to get over, you can't harvest it all in one day. And so you've got to help that crop get through that disease and stand so you can get it harvested. So when you get out that late, it's hard for me to say, hey, I'm going to put more yield on. What I'm looking at is how severe is that coming in? What's the hybrid you're wanting to protect, and do I need to help it for standability and harvestability? Soybeans, the big $100 million question for up is here is white mold. And so getting some fungicide on in that R3 to R5 time frame ahead of potentially white mold is a prudent decision. And to Nick's point, the later in the growth stage of a soybean, history has told me and showed me that it's better to wait later in the R stage on soybeans than it is the corn crop.
Yeah, I don't want to be repetitive here because I do agree with all that. I guess on the corn side of things, yeah, once you get to that R3 stage, um, which R3 is when that silk turns brown, which, brown silk isn't a stage because it turns brown, it stays brown through multiple stages type deal. But just for reference, once our silks get brown, things like that, you're primarily going after stalk strength and, like Rodney said, harvestability and things like that, which don't get me wrong, that's huge. I mean, I know Rodney, you've seen it, Nick's seen it, the research out there that shows what you save in terms of fuel costs and separator hours and things like that by simply harvesting 1 or 2 mile an hour faster type deal. So harvestability is huge, and like I mentioned earlier, um, other diseases like stock rots and stuff that the inoculum's already in the soil, it's going to set in if the plant's stressed out type deal. Um, but I'll also say now with later corn and that R3, R4, if a guy would call me about, I got some disease showing up, I'd ask where is it at on the plant? Because at this point I'm more concerned about the ear leaf and above. And if you take gray leaf spot or even tar spot and things like that, and a guy's already applied fungicide and some of it's showing up, but it's on the bottom 2 leaves, I'm way less concerned than if it's crawling up the plant at this point, type deal. And then, yeah, on the soybean side of things, if I was in a geography in general, the application in Northwest Missouri where I'm at is not real disease driven. We don't have near the white mold concerns as they do further up north. We don't get the frog eye leaf spot typically that they would further south type thing. And so since it's not disease driven, I base that application more off soybean growth and development. And so when do soybeans quit compensating? R3, R4 time frame, right? Or excuse me, R4 time frame, and then they start filling seed and pods and things like that at R5. And so I actually in soybeans, since it's not disease driven, I think we still got time there. to make a good application and make sure it's stress free once it hits the point that it's not going to put on more flowers and more nodes and more pods and things like that.
Good points, guys. I think with that said, I guess the last topic I wanted to get into quickly here at the end was just I don't know if you guys have noticed in your geographies or if you've had it, but for me, there's a fair amount of tip back or nose back in corn, and that the heat and the dry weather are causing some of that. It definitely is more prominent this year than last year. And so when you think about that, I mean, it's especially the high nighttime time temperatures that are problematic. You start getting over 70 degrees at night, and that plant has to respire to cool down. So basically, it just means it's wasting sugar that could have went to the ear to feed the kernels just to try to keep cool. Plus, you think about the warm temperatures and corn being a GDU driven crop, it's going to push it through grain fill stages faster the warmer it is, which is not a good thing. From a yield standpoint, you want slow grain fill stages so it can accumulate that slowly over time. A lot of this corn, sometimes get the question, like how late can it still abort kernels? Well, when we're at that milk stage, that R3 stage, those kernels have turned yellow. They pop like a pimple when you push on them. At that stage, we can still abort kernels. Obviously, a lot of it happens in the R2 stage, the blister stage, but still at R3, we still can. When we get to dough stage, which would be you kind of push that kernel and it oozes out, that's R4. That's going to be the yield impact there from stress is going to be more based on kernel weight, not as much on abortion anymore at that stage. And then we get on out the dent stage, and stress there is still going to impact kernel weight. And yeah, one thing about it is only about half of the dry matter is accumulated by the time we start R5. So there's still a fair amount of kernel weight that can be gained or lost when we get as late as R5. So just keep that in mind. I mean, in my geography, it's mainly the heat and the dry weather, but Derek did allude to something earlier I did want to point out, which is he was talking about like nitrogen loss, and that's a good point, and that's one I always think is really interesting in a wet year like this because you have fields that maybe looked never got side dressed or corrected, but they looked yellow early on. Then they kind of go through this period where they go through tassel, they kind of greened up, they look a lot better. But boy, once that ear starts setting on the side of them, they have to start utilizing nitrogen to fill that ear. All of a sudden, they go backwards again and they look yellow. And yeah, so definitely nitrogen loss. If you have a field with nitrogen loss, you're going to see things like tip back. You're going to see smaller kernels. Just wanted to point that out because Derek mentioned a lot of stress on this crop, and so there's multiple things that have been going on. But yeah, I've noticed more and more yellow fields showing up the last few days, especially yellow spots in fields, and that's what tends to happen. We start filling the ear, and it gets worse and worse. I don't know
Yeah.
if you guys want to jump in on that.
Yeah, the other thing to be cognizant of from pollination to black layers average 58 days. And so when we have these hot nights, and like Nick alluded to, and let's say we take 10% of those grain fill days off, that's 5 days. That doesn't sound like much, but so where Nick was alluding to tip back and kernel abortion, if we start pushing this to grain fill faster than it wants to or normal, and we start shaving days to black layer off, you're going to have kernel abortion, you're going to have tip back, you're going to have things like that happen. And that's why fungicide is another positive move to help the plant through that time. The other thing I'm noticing this year too is we had excellent growing conditions at a time when we had ear set or ear coming on, a lot of double ears. And so the plant has to decide now, am I going to raise a set of twins or am I going to go to one? And so what I'm noticing, I think some of these hybrids are now going to abort an ear, and then you might have, instead of having one nice bigger ear, you're probably going to have a good ear, but it's going to be a couple rows less than it would have been probably normal. So just some things to be cognizant of when you're watching some things and watch our nights that we could have some issues in the corn crop at harvest because of the weather we're having right now.
Good points, Rodney. Derek, you got anything to add?
No, I'd agree with all that. I liked your point of, whenever we were getting the rains have definitely slowed compared to earlier this spring and even in June and stuff. But we were seeing some nutrient stressors. Like I said, I call them the leachables, the ones that are going to highly leach with rainfall, nitrogen, sulfur, boron, those types of things. We were seeing that, but then you're exactly right. We get to tassel type time frame, and the corn kind of greens up a little bit again. But we are reaching that point where I think some of those nutrient deficiencies are going to be called out if it wasn't side dressed or top dressed and things like that. And similar with the fungicide that we've been talking about, I think. I think you're going to be rewarded, during a lot of this corn, and it was pollinating. It wasn't necessarily showing nutrient deficiency, but the corn plant's not going to maximize its root system till R3, which a lot of it's getting there. So it's not going to, grow longer roots and things like that to reach more nutrients. And so if you're short on it, that's going to get pulled out as this corn starts to add test weight and fill seed. And then just like on the same thing with the fungicide, you get a lot of people that I get a lot of calls right around now where it's like, well, should I go ahead and spray because I got disease showing up? And it's like, well, why didn't you apply, 21 days ago whenever it was at full tassel? And they're like, well, it's clean then. And, it doesn't necessarily help us out this year if you're in that situation. But I think it goes to show that you got to be proactive, not only with your nutrients and not only with your fungicide. And honestly, when the crop looks good is when I want you to be applying that stuff because it will show up later type deal.
Good points, Derek. Yeah, to me, this seems like it's setting up to be one of those years where good management will be rewarded, but we'll see how it plays out in the end. Just enough stress to kind of separate that. With that said, guys, I think we've probably covered enough miles, enough topics for one time, but appreciate everyone joining us today. Appreciate the input, Derek, Rodney. We'll look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.